All right, Raj, thanks so much for doing this. I'm really pumped that you're joining me today on this discussion. Give me a quick background on what Discern is. Why did you decide to start Discern? And then I would also love to know the problem that you're solving for your customers.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. Discern at its simplest is a registered agent. A registered agent is a provider of compliance services, entity management services, and entity compliance services. So, actually one of the most pervasive areas of business compliance in the US and actually around the globe is entity compliance. It's like this extremely boring area of compliance, but very necessary. So every entity that anybody has out there, whether you're at Google all the way through to Blackstone, all of your entities need to have something called a registered agent for all the jurisdictions that they're registered in, a local agent that represents you. And so we provide those services all across the US. And so what we've done differently, because it's a very old area of compliance, is we have digitized it. So at this point, we've digitized over 10,000 different US government filings. So our clients can do their entity compliance out of our software in any jurisdiction they need to digitally. And that's really the innovation that Discern has brought to the market.
So maybe walk me through the product experience, not just walking me through it, but then I'm also curious, like, who do you sell to? Like, who's the typical buyer and how do they onboard onto the product?
Yep. Yeah. So the typical buyer is usually either out of the finance function or the legal function or a combination of the two. I'd say about 75% of the time we see the primary user of our software out of the finance function, but and about 30% of the time out of the legal function. But essentially what we're doing for either of those two functions is automating their ongoing compliance. So let me give you an easy example. You might be a business out there that has operations in all 51 jurisdictions. That doesn't mean in the US. So all the states plus the District of Columbia. That doesn't mean you necessarily have people or offices, or you could. It could be that you do so much sales volume in all these states that you're emitting sales tax or have business licenses or other reasons to be registered everywhere. And so let's say you're an e-commerce business that does hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue out there. You're registered in every jurisdiction in the country. And in each of those jurisdictions, you need a
Wait,
registration.
in this illustrative example for an e-commerce business, like how
Yeah.
many entities could that be? Like, and how many times, like, could a person on that team kind of be going into these distinct portals, for the
Well,
government, kind of be
e-
submitting?
ex- exactly. So in that example I was talking about, that's 51 different portals, or 51, a minimum of 51 different filings, potentially more every year that compliance team needs to do. And each filing is due on a different date with a different form on a different website. Some have to be mailed in, some have to be PDF submitted, some have to be digitally submitted. It's completely different. So you are juggling, at least in that circumstance, 51 different balls. But we have customers that have hundreds of entities or registrations, even in the thousands. And so you're talking about teams doing hundreds, if not thousands of these filings a year. So as the level of complexity, as your business scales, the level of complexity scales, we have some customers that have not-for-profit entities. Then they have professional corporations. Then they have normal corporations. Then they have LLCs. They even have different types of entity types. And so that adds another layer of complexity. So yeah, it's actually like a reasonably complex area of business compliance.
And who's the typical buyer that you're selling to?
Again, it's either CFO or GC or the department of the office of CFO or GC.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the time, one of those two are making the
Yeah.
decisions or influential in the
And
decision.
what's the stack that they were using before Discern in
Yeah.
terms of doing
So
all
almost certainly anyone in the enterprise is using either a company called CT Corporation or CSC.
Yep.
Both of those companies are over 100 years old, and they dominate the enterprise in the US. I'd say about 60 to 75% of all entities in the US use one of those two. And certainly in the enterprise, it would be 90% plus. It's a bit of an oligopoly market structure.
Yeah. And then I'd love for you to walk through like the onboarding process for this, because it feels like on one end, a customer can have hundreds, if not thousands of entities, which I imagine the CFO or the GC is taking a lot of time, multiple touch points per year to kind of update the information, maybe the office address, et cetera, and also payment information that's there.
Yep.
But walk me through, like, you find one of these customers, could be an operating business, could be a private equity fund, et
Yep.
cetera. How do
Yep.
you onboard them into the system? And then maybe walk me through, like, once they're onboarded, what happens post that experience?
Yeah. So to onboard, all we need is a list of the entity names. We can, luckily enough, these entities are public record. And so we can pull, after we get the entity names, all of the other information that we need to onboard you from public record. So we don't need to burden the company in any way with that. And so we've had customers that have 400 entities that have signed a contract in the morning, and by the close of business, they're onboarded. Usually it takes like a 20 to 30-minute phone call where we just do it with them online, over the phone or on Zoom. So it's not a particularly burdensome onboarding process from that perspective. We've built a lot of technology that automates, the ingestion of the data. So we don't have our customers entering their own data back into our system. We do that for them. And then the real trick, besides the data entry, which we've automated, is we have to then go as Discern, as the registered agent, and file a change of agent filing in every jurisdiction that applies. We have also automated and abstracted that away from the customer. We generate those filings, we sign those filings, we submit those filings, we pay for those filings. And so again, all of that is done in an automated way so that we can, onboard large customers really quickly. So we can get to, you've made a decision to move and you want to generate that ROI that move's going to, deliver. We can get that done within a day.
Yeah. So would you say this is on the Discern stack? Is it one of those things where when a customer signs with Discern, they're replacing CT or CS?
Exactly. In every single situation that we are selling, we are replacing an existing solution.
Yeah.
We don't typically sort of, help customers spin up a brand new business that's never existed before. Of course, we do new formations for our customers all the time. If you're an existing customer and you need a new LLC, we do that for you. We can register new entities in new states. We are taking 90% of our customers from CT and
Yeah.
CSC.
And what's kind of the kind of feedback from a customer when you're saying, "Hey, we're going to replace an existing stack," and all
Yeah.
of a sudden you're going to replace an existing solution and then actually move to you? Like, what I've noticed when we have these conversations with founders, like that is typically a very heavy lift to kind of
Yes.
rip and replace. But it sounds like you're
Yep.
actually doing that really, really well.
Yeah. And so there's a couple of things, parts of that. Obviously we need to show the company that's looking to purchase the software that we can take their existing spend, and we're price competitive with the existing spend almost all the time, sometimes lower. And we can generate far more ROI for that existing regulated mandatory spend than they are currently achieving, right? That really needs to be what, the companies that we're talking to can see with their own eyes in terms of what's the benefit, right? What's the inertia to get them, what's the value generated to overcome the inertia to get them to move. And so we spent all our time trying to build more and more product that we could give to our customers that generate a bigger and bigger value gap. So it's even more of a no-brainer for our customers to move over. And so that can be trying to reduce the onboarding time that we just discussed to make it as simple as possible and as quick as possible to move over. But that's also around a lot of the automation tools that we've built into the software. And so I very flippantly said that, hey, you can now file all these filings out of our system. But what that generally means is that the time to be compliant goes down by a factor of 10 for our customers. So if a customer was spending 100 hours a year previously, they're spending 10 or less with us now. Right. And of course, that's multiplied. Some customers were spending 1,000 hours a year being compliant because they had hundreds and hundreds of entities. And so, obviously, as your business scales, you have to spend more time on this, and then the savings get greater and greater.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so maybe on that point, kind of post the rip and replace, how do you come up with pricing, for this
Yeah.
business? And it sounds like you have different components or different SKUs of pricing, the way that you're describing the product.
Yeah. So, I mean, we price how the industry prices. So we price on the same pricing structure as you are currently paying. It's kind of we try to make it as easy as possible for you to compare an apple with an apple, right? From an ROI perspective, it's like, hey, I already spend, and it's usually the whole industry prices on an annual price per registration per year, right? So, and usually it's not particularly expensive. It's a couple of $100 a year. So if you have a Delaware corporation, it's a couple of $100 a year to have a registered agent in Delaware. We are also a couple of $100 a year. And so we try to make it very easy for a CFO or GC who's out there to say, this is what I spend. This is what I'm going to spend on Discern. It's very apples to apples. And then you can see the differences in terms of the time it's going to take, the visibility you're going to have, the level of compliance we can get you to. 80% of the customers that we onboard usually are out of compliance somewhere for some reason, right? So we can make people more compliant. And so we try to make it very simple from a pricing perspective so that you're not having to run complicated analyses. And I know, particularly with AI right now, it's not always an apple to an apple. It's an apple to an orange and a banana. And you're trying to figure out and explain to your board, perhaps, like, is there actually ROI in what I'm doing here?
Yeah. Maybe kind of on that topic of AI, I think you and I have kind of discussed this in kind of offline conversations, but you're dealing with, as I understand your business, you're dealing with, you know, potentially terabytes of documents,
Hmm.
and the data is mainly in PDFs, and the PDFs are kind of structured in different formats by state that's there.
Hmm.
And you've told me before in passing that you've tried various frontier models to kind of see what's worked and what hasn't. Some have actually worked pretty well, others have not, but you decided to kind of roll a lot of your own machine learning. So I'm curious, like, as we think about for a lot of the readers in the audience, when it comes to BXB, there's a lot of folks willing to try pilots of AI and try pilots of pointed solutions, but there's this kind of learning curve that's there. So I'm
Yep.
curious, as you and the team have kind of started building out the infrastructure and the tech, how have you kind of tested R&D and kind of
Yep.
willing to place bets, quote unquote, to say, hey, we're actually going to invest in core ML machine learning, but at the same time, there's new frontier models coming out. How do we try those things? So maybe walk me through, and especially for the audience, like how do you think about those bets from an R&D perspective?
Yeah. And look, it's really difficult, just like it is. I'm sure everybody's grappling with this. I think that you have to run little experiments and do some trial and error. And whenever we have a new problem, we have a menu of existing technologies that we already use today and understand well and have deployed, and they're like are in production in our world and are serving our customers and ourselves. And then we have other things that typically we've usually tried before, but didn't sort of meet the hurdle of ROI or weren't as good as what we previously did. And so what we usually do is we usually go and look at the existing tools, run it through that first, right? That's already set up from an infrastructure perspective. We can test those really quickly and we see if the results are like great. And if they're great, we typically don't go and try every single tool again every single time we have a new technical challenge. That is just like too intensive. But if we don't find that the existing tools are great, then we sort of cascade over to potentially tools we used in the past that weren't that great, right? And test those. And if we sort of find they meet the bar and we want to move them into production, they come back into our stack from a production perspective and they become part of our toolkit of things that we go to first. And effectively, that's how I approach any technology across my last 15 years of being an entrepreneur, right? Like usually you start with the toolbox you already have before you try to go to a new toolbox like that. That is just more efficient. So I think that's generally how we approach it. I mean, I think just from a macro perspective, like we think a lot about like we are specialists in the thing that we do, right? In this like very significant and very deep and idiosyncratic like area of compliance, which is extremely fragmented. So like, and so what we have done is when we tried to use these sort of generic models, to your point, like we were not seeing the ROI, particularly for the cost structure of these generic models. And so we sort of focused and said, look, it's worth us investing in our own technology here, right? To make it like truly great. And so I think like it's very important for, I would say technology companies or people who are trying to adopt technology out there. That is like the biggest fork in the road that you need to make is what I'm doing so proprietary and so fragmented and so difficult that we need to roll our own technology, or can it be done by sort of existing generic models, or will generic models be able to get there in some time period that makes sense?
How do you, I mean, just kind of go deeper on that topic. How do you test and evaluate that? And maybe I'd be curious, right? Because we've now known you for so long, we've lived through kind of many
Yeah.
different technology super cycles. But I'm curious maybe how that worked in the first business that you did, the second business that you did, maybe the third business now, which is Discern. And also maybe well, like what lessons you can give, especially
Yeah.
buyers out there to kind of managing this,
Well,
because so many people are struggling with this topic right
this definitely happened with my second business, which is, as you know, in bank software. So we were a fintech company selling enterprise software to banks, and we've since exited that business. But we built that business from sort of 2016 all the way through 2025, and along that period, blockchain was a big deal for a couple. I mean, it still is a big deal, but for a couple of years there, it's all anybody wanted to talk about for a while. Like, what
Maybe
is your
maybe
blockchain
take
strategy?
a step back. What was the problem? Like, maybe describe the business mantle and what the problem
Yep.
was solving and how you went about doing it.
Yeah. So what we did was we built software that helped US banks, credit unions open accounts for their customers in a more seamless way, right? So it was a piece of software that helped banks open accounts for businesses and consumers. It's more complicated than that because there's a lot of compliance. We moved a lot of money. We would move billions and billions of dollars a month in money. And we would integrate with bank cores, and we were a high risk vendor to US banks. So we were sort of had regulation and all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of times people would come to us and be like, what are you doing in blockchain to help drive the business?
Because that at that moment in time when you were building the business, that was the super cycle that we were.
That was the super cycle, right? Just like mobility was a cycle before that, and everybody was doing delivery, and there was scooters and super cycle, and then food was in, and all of these sorts of things. I'm old enough to remember when the super cycle was mobile. Yeah, everybody had to have a mobile app. And so, like at the end of the day, our customers did not care what technology we used. They cared about the outcomes we were driving. And so from our perspective as a technology company, we had to use the most efficient technology to deliver the outcome our customers wanted, not just the hyped technology or the one that maybe investors wanted us to use. At the end of the day, investors want us to make money and customers want us to deliver results. And so we have to make decisions that are just using the best tools in our toolkit, the most efficient, and the ones that are going to scale the best, right? And so like at that point, it made absolutely no sense for Mantle to do anything in the blockchain. It would have been a significant regulatory hurdle. It wasn't clear in any way that it would deliver any better outcome than using existing payment rails, right? Speed of funding, while important, wasn't mission critical to, opening an account. And so it just didn't make sense. It would have been, frankly, marketing for us to have gone and used blockchain as part of our business, and it would not have driven an outcome for our customers. And so it's the same with Discern. We use AI when it will generate the best outcome for our customers. What our customers care about is they can spend the same or less money, generate a significantly better outcome, spending less time and being more compliant. And so every piece of technology that I use, whether it's AI or anything else, has to deliver or enhance that outcome. And if it does, we use it. And if it doesn't, we don't. That's the end of the story.
I mean, what I'm hearing from you from the Mantle and the Discern experience is just like there's a lot of noise kind of that happens outside of your business. And that noise is either through trade or colleagues or competitors when it comes to the stack that you're experiencing or that you're evaluating. And you're basically trying to find truth in both Mantle and Discern around what makes sense for the customer base for the outcome, like focus on the outcome
Yeah.
and also what makes sense just on the core team that you have, kind of in the values that you have from the technology infrastructure standpoint. I
Right.
think, how do you, I think now, like in this business, because now you're building it in the AI era, how do you go about, you know, not just for you, but the rest of the team around running experiments and giving kind of the freedom to the team to run experiments on the product and the engineering side? And then on top of that, how do you, how do you then share those learnings, right, that folks are using?
Yeah. So it's so funny because we're actually doing this right now in both engineering and our growth team with different AI tools. And so the way we started it is the leaders within those organizations both have agency to go procure, try different tools. And obviously the team that, they work with, they set the expectation. If you guys hear of anything or you see other people doing stuff, like let's discuss, let's try and use them. And so in each of those two departments, they have not dedicated, but individuals that are assigned and say like, hey guys, you are usually on the more senior end of those teams, right? That are very experienced, but are still sort of young enough that they really understand the new technology that's coming along, that are sort of like, you guys are going to be the people that will do the skunk works on these new tools and try them yourself. Right? They're the tenured sales executives. They're the tenured engineers. It's not the engineer that's never seen our stack before we hired last month, right? It's the engineer that's extremely, experienced, extremely knowledgeable about our technology that's trying these things because they're figuring out how often is it correct? What's the level of accuracy? What is the actual efficiency I'm getting as an experienced person before you sort of deploy it to everyone and hand the keys to somebody who might be newer. And so like, that's how we test it internally. And actually it's being deployed in stages by each team leader as they sort of see that ROI tick over and as they feel comfortable with, the tooling.
That's interesting in terms of having the senior leadership, both on growth and engineering, and those folks that are tenured kind of evaluate the tools. It's this interesting dynamic that's happening right now, which is for folks that are very tenured, especially on the engineering side, they may have a certain way of shipping code.
Right.
And that is potentially not the way that a lot of younger teams are shipping code today, where most of it is AI driven. So
Right.
I'm curious, when you've actually recruited either growth or engineering and someone who's really senior, like, how are you testing and evaluating that individual who is willing to say, hey, this is the way that I actually shipped and built code, or this is the way that I actually shipped and built go to market? I
Yeah.
am willing to try net new workflow,
Yeah.
but at the
It's
same
it.
time, and testing that my prior way of working was still effective,
Yeah.
but I know that there's actually a set of new tools and workflows that I can actually be more advantageous.
It's two things. The first is we interview the exact same way we interviewed before AI was here, which is from first principles. We just look and try to find the smartest possible, most curious, most intelligent person we can that understands their subject matter really well. Because the reason is you still have to interpret the AI and check and understand if it's correct or not. And if you don't understand first principles, how can you possibly understand whether the output, which is built on first principles, is correct or not? Right? At the end of the day, the humans are responsible for the output of the AI. And so we still interview for the same level of intellect, IQ, etc. In fact, we do not allow anybody to use any AI tooling during the interview process. Right? But then the next question is, well, okay, like it's an old dog. How are you going to teach them new tricks? Well, it's kind of self-selecting. We're a startup, right? Like you self-select in to come work here because you want a fast-paced environment. You care about change. You want to embrace change because you wouldn't be here otherwise. And so we sort of, fortunately from a cultural perspective, the people we tend to attract are people that want to adopt the new technology. And frankly, that's a selling point for them leaving potentially a large corporate job to come here. So
Yeah.
we don't actually have that sort of cultural,
Yep.
barrier, but we still interview for the same IQ or intellect or, principles than we did before.
Amazing. Raj, thanks so much for doing this. If folks wanted to get in touch and learn more about Discern, what's the best information to get in touch with you? And what's the details? Where can we find you on the internet?
Yeah, for sure. It's just discern.com, www.discern.com, spelled correctly, DISCERN. And then my email address is just raj@discern.com. Feel free to email me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Raj, for joining.
Okay, take care.